Turn it up. If she can't handle a little noise, maybe this isn't the right neighborhood for her. The words sliced through the evening just as the alarm triggered, a piercing shriek ripping across the patio. The woman in the wheelchair flinched, hands trembling, her breath snagging in her throat. And while everyone else recoiled, the quiet man beside her didn't shout or threaten. He simply looked at the device as if he'd known it his entire life. Because the moment that high-decibel blast hit his wife, something far more dangerous than noise woke up inside this family. Before I show you the exact moment their military son stepped forward and turned this whole HOA upside down. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. This wasn't a story about sound. It was about consequences finally catching up. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move toward the HOA president or argue with the cluster of board members standing smugly by the lamppost they had modified. He just touched his wife's shoulder, steadying her as the echo faded. There was a calmness in him, the kind that belonged to men who had seen far worse than arrogant neighbors and amateur intimidation tactics. But under that calm lived something else, a calculation, a quiet warning, a shift in the air that no one noticed except the woman he was trying to protect. She could feel the tension in his hand as he wheeled her back inside. She didn't say a word, but her eyes told him what her voice couldn't. She needed him to stay level, stay patient, stay in control. Even as the alarm's residue buzzed in her skull, she trusted him to anchor everything. The house wasn't much, but it was theirs, bought with years of sacrifice and endless medical hours that shaped every corner of their life. Inside, he checked her breathing the same way he had countless times, watching for that dangerous tightening in her muscles that always followed sensory overload. She closed her eyes, fighting through the trembling in her jaw. When he brushed her hair from her face, she leaned into his hand with the same quiet bravery she carried through every day she couldn't walk without pain. Outside, the HOA board was still gathered, laughing, discussing proper enforcement, as if the sound didn't fracture the world of the woman trembling in his arms. But anger didn't appear on his face. It stayed buried where only he could reach it, beneath years of discipline, beneath the skill set he never talked about after leaving the Air Force. The title of maintenance worker fit him just fine. It let him work unseen, and people rarely fear the man who sweeps their sidewalks. He stepped to the window and watched Vivian Crestwell gesture proudly at the new wildlife deterrent, her designer bracelets catching the porch light as she spoke. She acted like the entire neighborhood was her stage, her rules absolute, her power unquestioned. And maybe it was, until today. He logged the exact timestamp of the alarm activation on a small pad he kept tucked by the window. He recorded the duration, the pitch, the slight harmonic shift that no one else would catch. He wasn't collecting anger, he was collecting proof. His son's old duffel bag was still tucked near the couch where he'd dropped it the night before, fresh from the Navy, fresh from a world that knew exactly how dangerous sound could be. The father hadn't told him yet, not fully, how bad things had gotten. He didn't want to drag him into this, but he also knew the alarm wasn't just harassment anymore. It was harming the woman who had already survived enough. She whispered his name, voice weak but steady, and he returned to her side. She wanted reassurance. He wanted to give it. So he did what he always did, spoke gently, promised they'd handle it, promised she wasn't alone in this. Her fingers curled around his wrist, a reminder of their unspoken agreement: survive today, fight tomorrow. The HOA board dispersed, leaving behind the faint metallic hum of the device cooling down after its latest blast. He listened to it. He recognized the signature of a machine that wasn't meant for suburban wildlife. He'd seen similar frequencies used in airfield perimeter tech. He'd seen them fail, misfire, hurt people who weren't supposed to be anywhere near them. The neighbors avoided his eyes on their evening walks, not out of cruelty, out of fear. HOA politics made people quiet, forced them into the background. He understood. He didn't blame them, but he also knew this silence wouldn't last forever. He finished checking his wife's vitals, then stepped outside alone. The air was cooler now, carrying the faint smell of cut grass and something sharper, the residue of power misused. He approached the lamppost, not touching it, just standing within range, absorbing its construction, reading its angles, memorizing the custom mount someone had installed, someone who either didn't know what they were doing or didn't care. He took another note, another time stamp, another small piece of a puzzle he already understood far better than those who placed it there. Tomorrow he'd talk to his son, not as a father asking for help, but as a man preparing for the moment when truth finally demands the light. He stayed by the lamppost until the cold crept through his sleeves, committing every bolt and angle to memory before heading back inside. She had drifted into a light sleep, her breathing steadier now, though a faint tremor still pulsed through her fingers. He tucked a blanket around her, brushed her forehead with the back of his hand, and let the quiet settle. But he didn't sit. He didn't rest. He went straight to the counter, opened his small notebook, and wrote down everything he'd just seen. Because this wasn't going away on its own. The house made small nighttime noises, the hum of the refrigerator, the tick in the ceiling vent, the distant thrum of a streetlight drone. All of it helped him separate normal sound from the artificial residue the alarm left behind. Most people wouldn't hear it. He did. Years of tuning engines and reading vibrational signatures had trained his ears differently, and tonight, those instincts were loud. He checked the window again. Vivian Crestwell's porch light was still on, her shadow occasionally passing across the blinds as she moved around her spotless living room. She was confident, secure, certain she had made her point. People like her always believed their authority was absolute, and maybe, in most cases, it was. But she had crossed into a world she didn't understand, a world where frequencies weren't harmless and wildlife control wasn't a toy for personal irritation. He slipped outside again, quieter this time, not to confront anyone, that moment hadn't come yet, but to follow the path around the lamppost and down the line of houses. His boots stayed light on the pavement as he listened for discrepancies. A faint rattle near a neighbor's porch caught his attention. He crouched, pressing a hand against the wooden rail. A vibration hummed through it like a heartbeat out of rhythm, subtle, but absolutely out of place. He made another note. Walking back home, he felt the weight of every detail stacking into something larger. This wasn't just harassment anymore. It might already be affecting structures, not just people. That was the kind of mistake HOAs didn't survive publicly, especially ones obsessed with perfect appearances. When he stepped into the kitchen, the duffel bag on the floor caught his attention again. His son had come home only the night before, exhausted from travel, but relieved to be back after years away. The plan had been simple. Let him rest before dragging him into the family's battles. But plans rarely survived reality. By morning, the house smelled faintly of coffee, and sunlight cut sharp lines across the counter. He had barely slept, checking on his wife through the night. She was doing better now, color slowly returning to her cheeks as she sat in the living room, wrapped in a soft blanket. She gave him a small smile, tired but grateful, and he returned it, with that same quiet steadiness he always carried. A heavy footstep came from the hallway. Their son emerged, rubbing sleep from his eyes, shoulders still carrying the military posture he hadn't shed yet. He took in the room, his mother's pale face, his father's weary posture, and instantly sensed something wrong. He started to speak, but his father lifted a hand gently, signaling patience. Not yet, not before he laid out every detail clearly. So, he led him outside. They walked the perimeter of the house together, the father explaining the events of the last weeks in low, even tones. The son listened without interrupting, jaw tightening with each new detail. When they reached the lamppost, he studied the device the same way his father had, with recognition, not confusion, and beneath that recognition, a flash of something sharper. "This wasn't built for birds," the son murmured finally, eyes narrowing at the angled emitter. His father didn't answer. He didn't need to. Together they examined the base, the wiring, the way the device had been mounted. The son crouched, running his fingers lightly along the casing. "It's directional," he said, tone low. "Whoever installed this aimed it intentionally." He gestured toward their porch, at her. Anger rose in him like a storm, but his father pressed a hand to his shoulder, grounding him. "We do this right," he said softly. "No shortcuts, no fighting what we can prove." That restraint, that discipline, was why people underestimated him. They mistook self-control for weakness. They mistook patience for surrender. It was a mistake they would regret. By afternoon, the son had started assembling a small toolkit from his duffel bag. Nothing threatening, just what looked like ordinary calibration instruments, though their actual capabilities came from training he rarely talked about. Even so, before he began, the father reminded him gently that this wasn't military terrain. Civilian rules demanded civilian methods. He nodded, accepting it. As he began recording frequency samples, the neighbors watched quietly from behind curtains. None approached, none spoke, but he saw the way their eyes lingered on the lamppost, the way they tracked Vivian's car when she drove past, the way they hesitated before stepping onto their porches. Fear was beginning to shift. His son returned inside with the first set of readings, placing the small device on the table. "Dad," he said, voice low, "this thing is way out of compliance. Way." He didn't reply immediately. He looked toward his wife, resting on the couch, her hands no longer shaking. Then he looked at the evidence forming in front of him, clean, undeniable, factual. This wasn't about revenge. It was about ending something that should never have begun. And now, for the first time, he wasn't facing it alone. He glanced at the growing file on the table. Things were changing fast, and anyone watching this unfold could feel the shift coming. If you're following along, subscribe with the bell on, because what happens next changes everything. The father studied the growing stack of readings on the kitchen table, each number tightening the picture forming in his mind. His wife rested nearby, breathing steadier, but still fragile from the alarm's impact. Nothing about this felt random anymore. Everything pointed to intention, not error, and that changed everything. His son worked silently beside him, assembling the measurements into a clear pattern. 3 early morning readings had already confirmed what they feared. The device wasn't malfunctioning. It was performing exactly as installed. The precision was unmistakable. Someone on the HOA board had aimed it deliberately, and the consequences were spreading. The father stepped outside, letting the cooler air steady him. Crestmont Ridge looked peaceful beneath its curated landscaping, but he now recognized the hidden strain underneath. Neighbors whispered instead of speaking openly. Windows stayed half-shuttered. Everyone felt something was wrong, but fear of fines or retaliation kept them silent today. He walked the street with his son, checking porches and rails. At the first house, a faint vibration trembled beneath painted wood. The homeowner admitted she had filed a complaint weeks ago. Nothing happened afterward. She assumed it was aging construction. The father knew better. Frequency damage always started subtly. At the next property, the son confirmed another harmonic pattern. Each reading strengthened the chain of evidence growing between them. This wasn't an isolated malfunction or a misguided installation. It was a neighborhood-wide effect, pointing back to one source. And the HOA president had approved every modification herself. When they returned home, the father checked on his wife again. She managed a small smile, but fatigue clung to her features. He reassured her softly, careful not to let worry slip into his voice. She trusted him completely. That trust steadied him more than any measurement or record could. Evening settled across the neighborhood when movement near the lamppost caught his attention. Vivian stood there with 2 board members, directing them to adjust the device's angle again. Her confidence radiated, unaware she was creating a deeper trail of accountability. Every bolt turned was another mistake documented by him. The son recorded the adjustment through the window, his expression sharpening with each new detail. He wasn't acting out of anger. He was following protocol the way he'd been trained. Observe, verify, confirm. And once enough confirmation existed, escalation became unnecessary. The evidence would speak louder than confrontation ever could. Inside, the father expanded the file on the table, arranging the neighborhood readings beside the first set. Patterns emerged instantly. Direction, timing, intensity, every detail aligned. He could already imagine the expression Vivian would wear when these findings appeared before her in a setting she couldn't manipulate at all. He checked the clock. The HOA board would meet again soon, and he knew Vivian would push her authority further before long. That was her pattern: control, dismiss, escalate. But now the balance had shifted. Quietly, steadily, the truth had begun building its own momentum against her that day. When the son joined him at the table, he laid out the next phase of testing. They would capture readings during different activation cycles, proving the intentional directionality of the device. The father agreed immediately. Precision mattered. Every clean measurement brought them one step closer to undeniable public exposure ahead. Later, as the evening deepened, a low hum drifted across the street. The alarm hadn't activated, but the son recognized the residual interference instantly. He stepped outside to confirm, noting fluctuations in the ambient levels. It meant the HOA had tested the device recently, strengthening the timeline they needed today. The father rechecked the notes, cross-matching times and readings. Everything aligned too consistently to be accidental. Intentionality was becoming difficult to deny, and once intent could be shown, liability followed. He felt no triumph in that thought, only the quiet responsibility of a man protecting what mattered most to him. Before midnight, the son calibrated one final reading, noting how the device's signature shifted as temperatures dropped. Technical details mattered. They strengthened credibility. He documented everything with the same discipline he'd learned during service, and the father watched, reassured by the precision shaping their path toward justice for this family. Outside, the street fell quiet again. The HOA members had retreated into their warm homes, unaware their actions were being recorded with absolute clarity. The father stepped onto the porch, breathing calmly. He didn't want escalation. He wanted truth, and truth once gathered had its own unstoppable force at last. When he returned inside, he found his wife awake, watching them with a steadiness that broke him open for a moment. She whispered a question he didn't need words to answer. They were closer now, closer than ever, and soon, the evidence they carried would speak for them both tomorrow. She lay propped on the couch when he returned from the porch, her eyes half open, holding that quiet strength she always carried when her body felt unsteady. He reassured her with a gentle touch on her arm before stepping back to the kitchen table, where the evidence continued to grow. His son sat across from him, reviewing the latest readings with a focused calm that mirrored his own. Nothing needed to be said. They both understood what came next. The lampost's new angle was a mistake Vivienne thought no one would notice, but the son had recorded it, time-stamped it, and already integrated it into their data log. The father watched his son work, seeing the precision that came from years of acoustic training. It was the same focus he once carried in his own Air Force days, before life forced him into quieter jobs and the world forgot what he could do. Even so, he kept his name out of it. Let the evidence speak. Let his son take the lead. People underestimated the young man too, just as they underestimated him. And underestimation was often the doorway to justice if used correctly. He stepped over to his wife again when she shifted, making sure her breathing stayed smooth. The alarm's earlier blast still left a faint tension in her neck, but she offered him a smile anyway, trying to lighten the weight she felt he carried. He didn't say it out loud, but protecting her was the only thing that made sense in this entire escalating battle. When morning light filtered through the blinds, neighbors began stepping outside again. He caught more glances today, longer, watchful. They sensed something shifting. The HOA president had pushed too hard with her weaponized noise, and the fear that once silenced them was thinning now. Quiet cracks formed in the control she held. The father walked the perimeter again with his son, checking for new signs of structural stress. A railing 2 houses down vibrated at a frequency they hadn't observed before. The son jotted the reading, nodding to confirm the pattern. "It's spreading," he murmured. "If they test the device again today, we'll catch a peak signature." The father agreed. "We stay ahead of her, not reactive, measured." That had always been his strength, staying calm while chaos tried to provoke him. Something people like Vivienne never expected. And that was why she had made a mistake installing this device. She assumed he would panic or lash out emotionally. Instead, he was applying the discipline of a former engineer, someone who knew that truth built on evidence was stronger than anger shouted in frustration. Later that afternoon, he prepared a small lunch for his wife, keeping her as comfortable as possible. Her voice came soft as she asked how things were progressing. He kept his answer simple. "We're working through it," because she didn't need to carry the full weight of their findings. She trusted him, and he wouldn't burden her with unnecessary worry until the right moment arrived. After she rested again, the son suggested they widen the perimeter check. The device's frequency range could be affecting homes further down the street. The father nodded and followed him. Each house they passed held subtle signs. Hairline cracks, loose fixtures, faint rattles no one had connected to the alarm yet. He made detailed notes of everything. At one house, a neighbor stepped outside and lingered on her porch before finally approaching. She hesitated, then admitted she had reported strange noises weeks ago, but received no follow-up from the HOA. Her eyes shifted nervously toward Vivienne's driveway. Fear made her voice shake. The father reassured her gently, promising nothing confrontational, simply that her information mattered. It was the first time someone had spoken openly, and he knew what it meant. Community silence was cracking. When they returned home, the father compared all the new signatures. The directionality of the device had become undeniable now, forming a clean pattern aimed right at their home and sweeping outward in a widening cone through the neighborhood. He traced the path with a fingertip, feeling the cold confirmation settle in. "This is intentional," the son said quietly, "not a misconfiguration. She wanted it to hit here." The father didn't respond immediately. He looked toward his wife through the doorway, asleep again, then back to the table filled with hard numbers. Anger would have been easy, but anger didn't win battles like this. Precision did. Patience did. And they now had both. As dusk approached, he heard footsteps outside, Vivienne inspecting the neighborhood again. She paused by the lamppost, unaware of the two sets of eyes watching her from behind the curtains. The father didn't step outside. Not yet. The time for confrontation would come only when the evidence was ironclad. When she walked away, the son turned to him. "We need an official third party to verify these readings." "I know who to call," the father replied. He had dealt with local officials before, quietly repairing town properties when others couldn't. One of them, Justice Ortega, had always valued honesty over politics. The father trusted that. And he knew Ortega would understand the seriousness of a misused acoustic device better than anyone else in Crestmont Ridge. He stepped outside with his phone, dialing the number. His voice stayed steady as he requested Ortega's presence. No drama, no complaints, just the facts. When he hung up, he breathed out slowly. The first official witness was now en route. The victory strategy had begun. Justice Ortega arrived just as the last streaks of daylight slipped behind the rooftops, his city-issued SUV pulling quietly to the curb. The father met him halfway down the driveway, greeting him with the same steady respect he'd shown years ago when repairing a cracked foundation at the municipal building. Ortega stepped out, scanning the neighborhood with the trained eye of someone who'd spent years navigating the tension between HOA power and homeowner fear. "You said it was urgent," Ortega murmured, lowering his voice. "It is," the father replied, "and it's better if you see the readings yourself." The son stepped beside him, offering a small nod of acknowledgement. Ortega recognized the disciplined posture instantly. Military, no need for formal introductions. Some things spoke without words. He followed them both inside, eyes narrowing as he took in the table covered in logs, charts, timestamps, and frequency signatures. Ortega lifted one sheet, reading slowly, his brows pulled together. "This doesn't look like a wildlife device." "It's not," the son said. "Its frequency pattern is directional and significantly higher than allowed. I've tracked at least 7 undocumented amplitude spikes." The father added, "It's affecting her." He glanced toward the living room where his wife rested, pale in the dim lamp glow. Ortega's posture shifted, seriousness settling over him. He moved to the window and looked out toward the lamppost. "Vivienne approved this installation. I know she pushed it through quickly, but I didn't expect anything like this." The father didn't answer. He didn't blame Ortega. Even good officials struggled when HOAs buried issues under technical jargon and selective documentation. But now, Ortega held undeniable data, raw signatures that exposed more than policy violations. They revealed negligence, and negligence with measurable harm. "Show me the perimeter," Ortega said. They walked the neighborhood together, the father pointing out vibration traces along porch rails, while the son demonstrated readings on his device. Ortega saw the patterns firsthand, the micro-tremors, the heat distortion residue, the unnatural hum beneath the boards. He didn't argue or doubt. He simply documented everything, his own notepad filling quickly. At the third house, he paused at a cracked planter. "This was new," the homeowner told him quietly, stepping out when she recognized Ortega. "I mentioned it to the HOA. They told me it was probably cheap material." Ortega crouched to inspect the break. The fracture lines ran clean and sharp, exactly the kind caused by repeated low-frequency vibration. He took a photo. This wasn't cheap material. The homeowner exhaled, relief and fear mixing in her expression. "So, It isn't just in my head. No, the father said softly. It's not. They moved on, gathering more proof. With each new confirmation, Ortega's composure tightened. He had seen HOAs push boundaries, but weaponizing an acoustic deterrent device, intentionally or not, crossed into legal territory far beyond typical administrative disputes. Back at the house, Ortega spread his notes beside the son's readings. "This is enough for a mandatory review," he said. "I'll have to file it formally. That means notifying the entire board." The father nodded. He knew it would escalate matters, but it had to happen. Vivian couldn't hide behind polished explanations once the data hit official channels. The son leaned forward. "The device is being activated at specific times. Someone schedules it manually or through a remote interface. The logs match the board's meeting hours, early morning patrols, and late-night wildlife deterrent tests." Ortega's jaw tightened. "That means intent. Or reckless disregard," the father said. "Either way, she's responsible." Silence settled over them, heavy, certain. Then Ortega asked the question that mattered most. "Are you ready for this to go public?" The father looked toward his wife, fragile, resting, stronger than she realized. Then back to his son, whose quiet determination never wavered. "We're ready," he said. Ortega nodded. "Then the process begins now." He packed his notes, but before leaving, he stepped closer and lowered his tone. "You were right to call me, and when this comes to the meeting, I want the two of you there. Evidence is powerful, but presence is stronger." After he left, the son continued reviewing their measurements, preparing them for the upcoming review. The father sat beside him, not with exhaustion, but with the clarity of a man who finally saw a path through the chaos. They weren't simply defending themselves anymore. They were documenting a truth the entire neighborhood needed to see. From the hallway, his wife called softly for him. He went to her side immediately. She reached for his hand, her grip weak but warm. "Is it getting better?" she whispered. "It will," he promised. "Soon." She believed him. She always had. As night deepened, the son organized the files into a concise packet. Frequency spikes, directional patterns, structural impacts, medical correlations. Evidence layered upon evidence. The father reviewed each page with the steady certainty of someone who'd once built systems designed to withstand far greater stresses than suburban politics. Tomorrow would be different. The HOA's confidence would begin to erode. And this time, silence wouldn't protect them. Outside, the lamppost hummed faintly, unaware its days were numbered. The faint hum from the lamppost carried through the cool night as the father locked the door behind Ortega. The weight in the house shifted, not lighter, not heavier, but aimed. For the first time since this began, someone with authority had seen the truth for himself. The father stepped into the living room, checking on his wife again. She stirred slightly, her breathing even, her hand still resting on the blanket where he had left it. He adjusted it gently, then let his fingers linger for a moment before returning to the kitchen where his son had already resumed organizing their files. "Ortega will alert the board by morning," the son said quietly, scanning the frequency graphs again. He didn't say it directly, but he knows this won't stay contained. "And it shouldn't," the father replied. "Not anymore." The son looked toward the lamppost outside. "She'll react." Vivian's type doesn't accept being questioned. Not by officials, not by homeowners, and certainly not by someone she thinks she can intimidate. "She'll push back harder," the father agreed, "but now she'll be seen while she does it." They both knew the next 24 hours would reveal how far the HOA president was willing to go to protect her control. The father poured a glass of water and sat at the table, reviewing the timeline they had constructed. Each entry was precise. The activation times, the decibel levels, the medical episodes, the structural vibrations. Nothing about it was emotional. It was a clean, factual chain, and such chains never broke once assembled correctly. Morning arrived sharp, sunlight cutting across the street as neighbors went about their routines. But subtle changes had crept in. Curtains shifted earlier. People lingered longer. On porches, watching interactions they had once ignored. Rumors had spread faster than anyone spoke them aloud. The father sensed it in the air, a quiet anticipation, uncertain but awake. He stepped outside to check the yard, as he always did. Routine grounded him. His son joined him, carrying the portable meter again. They examined the porch rail and confirmed the tremors had increased overnight. The son recorded it with a brief nod, adding another timestamp to their growing evidence chain. While they worked, a car slowed near the curb. A neighbor rolled down her window slightly, looking conflicted before she spoke. "Is it true?" she asked. "About the device? Someone said Ortega was here last night." The father didn't elaborate. "He came to verify the readings." She swallowed hard. "I filed a complaint too. They dismissed it." "You're not the only one," he said gently. Her eyes widened with relief and fear intertwined. She nodded, then drove off slowly, glancing at Vivienne's house as she turned the corner. The community was waking up, house by house. By midday, the HOA board sent out an official notice for an emergency review session. The father expected it. Vivienne would try to regain control before Ortega's findings escalated further. The wording in the notice was careful, almost polished. Technical reassessment, ensuring compliance, community partnership. It didn't fool him. It was the sound of someone preparing a defense. Inside, his wife sat upright for the first time in hours, the color in her cheeks returning slightly. She watched him read the notice and recognized the look in his eyes. "It's happening, isn't it?" she murmured. "It has to," he replied. "We've given them every chance to fix this quietly." Her gaze softened. She knew him well enough to understand that he wasn't seeking confrontation. He was seeking restoration, safety, dignity, stability. And he would move through every step carefully, the same way he approached every obstacle since the day she lost her ability to walk without pain. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge, the lamppost activated again. This time, the frequency was lower, shorter, but still pointed directly at their home. The father stood on the porch, listening. It was a test signal, one technicians used to recalibrate directionality before raising amplitude. His son stepped beside him. "She's adjusting the device again." "Trying to cover her tracks," the father said, "or reduce the footprint before the meeting." "Too late," the son murmured. "We already have the peak signatures." They recorded the signal in silence, letting the evidence deepen the trail Vivienne had unknowingly created for them. By the time the hum faded, their file had grown by another page, another undeniable measurement to present during the upcoming review. Back inside, the father organized the readings into chronological order while the son refined the structural vibration report. The data became a narrative, one that didn't need dramatic confrontation, just steady exposure. And exposure was exactly what their strategy required. Public visibility, undeniable proof, a reversal unfolding not through emotion, but through truth. As night settled in, a knock came at the door. A different neighbor stood there, hesitant, clutching a cracked picture frame. "This fell off the wall last night," she whispered. "Do you think it's connected?" The father examined the frame gently. The crack density matched low-frequency resonance impact. "Likely," he said. The neighbor exhaled shakily. "I want to add a statement to whatever you're doing." "You won't be alone," he assured her. She left looking lighter than when she arrived. When the father returned to the table, his son glanced up. "The neighborhood's shifting." "It needs to," the father replied. He stood by the window one last time, watching the faint glow of the lamppost. Its power over the community was fading, replaced by awareness and evidence, the kind that couldn't be silenced or intimidated away. Tomorrow, everything would begin to break open. The father stayed by the window long after the neighborhood lights dimmed, watching the lamppost glow with that faint, cold shimmer he had come to recognize too well. Morning would bring the emergency HOA review, and with it, the first true fracture in Vivienne's control. But dawn hadn't even touched the rooftops when the next escalation arrived. Earlier, sharper, crafted with intent. A stiff envelope slid beneath their door sometime before sunrise. The son found it first while heading to make coffee. "Dad," he called softly, holding it up. The father took it, already sensing what it was. Vivienne never waited for official processes to unfold. She always moved first, trying to tilt the ground in her favor. He opened the envelope and read the printed notice. A violation citation. 3 counts, all fabricated. Unmaintained property perimeter. Unauthorized equipment on porch. Improper obstruction of HOA-installed amenities. Amenities. That was how she labeled the device harming his wife. He set the paper on the table, jaw tightening only slightly. His son watched his face closely. "She's nervous," the son said. "This is what people do when they're losing control." The father didn't reply. He didn't need to. The citation was nothing more than a tactic, a last attempt to intimidate him into silence before the meeting. His wife woke while they discussed it. Even half drowsy, she caught the tension in the room. When he brought her breakfast, she paused. "Another notice?" "Yes," he said gently. "But this one won't stand." "I trust you," she whispered, touching his wrist before eating slowly. Her faith steadied him in ways she didn't fully see. By late morning, the neighborhood stirred with a tense kind of alertness. People glanced more openly toward the Rowan home. Something about the citation had spread quickly. Whether through neighbors or Vivian's own attempts to flaunt authority, didn't matter. Eyes were watching now. While the father checked the yard, a board member approached, one who rarely spoke in meetings, a man who always seemed overshadowed by Vivian's confidence. He cleared his throat. "I heard there was an issue last night." The father didn't offer details. "We received a citation." The board member winced. "I didn't approve any new notices." A small crack, a shift in allegiance. Fear mixed with guilt flickered behind the man's eyes. "I think she's acting alone now," he added quietly. "Then let the meeting bring everything into the open," the father said. The man nodded quickly and retreated, shoulders tense. The community was unraveling around Vivian's decisions, and the unraveling was accelerating. Inside, the son prepared the evidence packet with sharp precision. "We lead with the directional signatures," he said, "then structural reports, then the medical correlation. Keep it clear, no emotion," the father reminded. "That's the plan." They checked the readings one more time before leaving. The file had weight, not just physical, but decisive. It was the weight of truth in a community that had been manipulated by fear and pretense. As they walked to the HOA center, neighbors peeked through blinds. A few stepped out, small nods, quiet murmurs of support. People who had once stayed silent, now willing to be seen aligned with the man they once overlooked. Vivian was already inside the meeting hall when they entered. She stood at the front, polished and poised, her expression smooth as glass. But the father noticed the stiffness in her posture, the slight tension at the corners of her mouth. She was ready to perform authority again. "Well," she said loud enough for everyone to hear, "I hope this emergency meeting clarifies some misunderstandings certain individuals have been spreading." Several board members shifted uncomfortably. The father didn't speak. His son placed the evidence packet on the table with quiet certainty. That small sound, paper meeting wood, changed the atmosphere instantly. Vivian arched a brow. "Is this another accusation about the wildlife deterrent? I assure everyone, it's not a wildlife deterrent," the son said calmly, "and the readings will show that." Vivian stiffened. "Who are you to interpret technical devices?" He didn't raise his voice. "The readings come from calibrated equipment. Anyone in this room can verify the results." The father noticed the first ripple of doubt move through the crowd. People leaned forward. Board members exchanged glances. The facade Vivian built was beginning to bend. To maintain control, she pivoted. "Before we entertain baseless claims, I'd like to address multiple violations issued this week." The son let out a slow breath. The father didn't flinch. Let her bring them up. Let her display the tools she used to silence dissent. She held up the citation. "This family continues to obstruct HOA operations." "May I see that?" a board member interrupted. The same man who had spoken to the father earlier. Vivian hesitated, then reluctantly handed it over. The member scanned it. "This citation isn't logged in our system." The room shifted again. Another member frowned. "You issued this without board approval?" Vivian attempted to recover. "It was within my discretion as president." "No," the member said, firmer now. "Not when it concerns a device under active review." She opened her mouth again, but for the first time, voices from the community rose to challenge her. "I complained about the noise too. Nothing was done. My porch rail started vibrating. Why did you ignore the reports?" Vivian's polished composure began to crack. The father finally stepped forward, not with hostility, but with clarity. "We're not here to argue. We're here to present evidence. Let the facts speak." He opened the folder. The son laid out the first graph. The room fell silent. Vivienne took a step back. Public exposure, the first phase, had begun. The father placed the first graph on the table, its clean lines and spikes standing out against the polished wood. Conversations died instantly. People leaned forward as if pulled by gravity. Vivienne, who had positioned herself confidently near the podium, took a small step back, the first visible sign that control was slipping out of her hands. The son clicked on a small remote, projecting the frequency pattern onto the screen behind them. The graph illuminated the room with undeniable clarity, a sharp directional spike aimed straight from the lamppost toward the Rowan home. "This is a 29-second activation from last night," the son said evenly. "Not a wildlife deterrent. This amplitude is consistent with non-lethal acoustic devices used for perimeter enforcement." A murmur rippled through the room. The father didn't look at Vivienne. He watched the community instead. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact were now openly reacting, brows raised, mouths parted, hands covering shock. Their silence wasn't fear anymore. It was awakening. Vivienne forced a laugh. "Let's not exaggerate. These readings could be from anything. Faulty equipment, user error, creative interpretation." The son placed the second graph beside the first. "This one is from 3 nights ago. Same signature, same direction, same illegal amplitude." He tapped the harmonic resonance section. "And this part matches the structural vibrations recorded in 5 homes on this street." The board members went utterly still. One finally spoke. "Is that why my porch rail started shaking last week?" Another added, "My daughter said her picture frames rattled. We thought it was nothing." Vivienne lifted her chin sharply. "Please, none of this proves the device is harmful. And even if it were stronger than intended, the HOA approved it for a reason." The father finally looked at her. "You approved it without disclosure, and you aimed it." Vivienne's lips pressed into a thin line. "Those are unfounded accusations." The son switched to a third slide, the directional overlay. A red triangle extended from the device, sweeping across the Rowan porch and widening into the neighborhood. "This is directionality mapping," he said. "You can clearly see the emitter's targeting angle. And this," he pulled a small video clip, "is footage of board members adjusting the device under your instruction." The room erupted. "You moved it on purpose?" "They adjusted it toward his house." "This looks intentional." Vivienne held her hands up. "Everyone calm down. This is being taken out of context." "Is my cracked planter out of context too?" a neighbor shouted, lifting a photo. "What about the noise complaints you ignored?" "My son couldn't sleep for 2 weeks." For the first time, the board stood not behind her, but apart from her. The father stepped aside, allowing the son to continue presenting. He wanted the data to speak louder than emotion, and it did. The son showed medical correlation timestamps next. Each alarm activation aligned with episodes that affected the father's wife, her tremors, her pain, her neurological stress. A visible tightening spread across the faces in the room as they realized this wasn't an inconvenience. It was harm. Vivienne's eyes sharpened. "All devices have side effects. This family is dramatizing." The board member who had approached the father earlier stood abruptly. "Enough. You issued a citation last night without our approval. And this data," he gestured toward the screen, "looks like negligence." Vivienne's voice rose. "I did what was necessary for the community." The father looked at her then. Really looked. "A community doesn't harm the people who live in it." That simple sentence silenced the room more completely than any graph. The board demanded an immediate recess to review the evidence privately. As they filed into the back room, the community buzzed with energy. People approached the father, some apologizing for staying silent, others offering their own experiences. The son answered technical questions while the father remained focused on his wife's well-being, checking his watch, remembering she was home resting. He stepped outside for air. The wind carried faint hints of pine and freshly cut grass, the normal smells of their street. For the first time, the neighborhood didn't feel hostile. It felt ready. His son joined him. "This is turning fast." "It needed to," the father said. "Truth works that way when it's finally seen." A soft chiming sound rang from the HOA meeting hall. The recess was over. Back inside, The board members returned with unmistakable expressions: embarrassment, anger, and grim understanding. The chair cleared his throat. "We've reviewed the evidence. Effective immediately, the device will be deactivated pending removal." Whispers swept across the room, part relief, part disbelief. "But that is only the first action," another board member added. "We are opening a formal inquiry into the approval process and any falsified citations issued without board consent." Vivienne's face drained of color. "You can't do this. I am the president of this community." "You were," the chair corrected quietly. The father watched her carefully. This wasn't triumph. It was accountability. As the meeting adjourned, neighbors crowded them, thanking them, apologizing, offering help. The son gathered the evidence packet while the father nodded politely, quietly, staying grounded. This wasn't over, but the tide had turned. Outside, under the soft evening sky, he walked beside his son toward home. Every step felt different, lighter. Not because the battle was finished, but because justice had finally begun moving. And momentum, once earned, rarely slowed. If you're following this journey, subscribe with the bell on, because the turning point is just beginning. They walked home beneath the fading evening light, the father keeping a steady pace while his son carried the evidence folder tucked safely under his arm. The air felt different now, not relaxed, not resolved, but clearer, as if the neighborhood itself finally exhaled after weeks of tension. Porch lights flicked on one by one. Neighbors who once kept their heads down now nodded as the two passed, small gestures of gratitude forming where silence had lived before. When they reached the house, the father peeked into the living room first. His wife rested peacefully, her breathing level, the soft glow of a lamp casting warm light across her blanket. Seeing her calm grounded him instantly. He eased back into the kitchen where his son set the folder down. "She's safe for now," the son murmured. The father nodded. "The device is being deactivated. That helps tonight." "But Vivienne isn't finished," the son added. "Losing the device is one thing. Losing her power is another." The father knew that well. People who clung to authority rarely surrendered it quietly. And Vivienne had built her entire identity on maintaining control. She wouldn't accept the board's suspension without trying to spin the narrative back in her direction. The question wasn't whether she'd retaliate again, but how. He poured water into 2 glasses, handing one to his son. "Tomorrow will tell us what she plans next." But the next move didn't wait until tomorrow. He basta. An hour later, a sudden knock struck the door. Sharp, hurried. The father exchanged a look with his son before opening it. A couple stood outside, neighbors from 2 houses down. Their porch light shined behind them, making their expressions appear even more strained. "Can we talk to you?" the woman asked, wringing her hands. "It's about the meeting." The father stepped aside, inviting them in. They sat at the kitchen table, voices hushed, though tension thickened the air. "We overheard part of the board's discussion after you left," the man said. "They didn't know anyone else was still in the hallway." The father leaned forward. "What did you hear?" The woman swallowed hard. "Vivienne is trying to argue negligence on the contractor's side. She's saying the installation wasn't her fault, that someone else altered the device after it was approved." The son exhaled slowly. "She's trying to redirect liability." "That's not all," the man added. "She's pushing for an emergency motion to delay all action until an external technician reviews it. She wants time to rewrite the narrative." The father's jaw tightened. Delay brought risk, not to their evidence, but to public perception. Time softened outrage. Time let people forget the trembling porch rails and sleepless nights. Time was Vivienne's best weapon now. He thanked the couple and walked them out, reassuring them that everything would be handled properly. When he closed the door, his son crossed his arms, frustration simmering under his calm exterior. "She's trying to stall until she finds a way to discredit everything." "Yes," the father said. "Which means we continue gathering what she can't discredit." He went to his notebook, flipping to the page that tracked the most recent readings. Even though the device had been deactivated for removal, earlier activation logs still formed a timeline impossible to undo. "We need one more piece," the son said quietly. "Something she can't argue is subjective or misread." "Directionality during different weather conditions," the father said immediately. "Crosswind shifts, temperature differentials, they affect amateur installations differently than professional ones. The son nodded. And the device was tested in both warm mornings and cool evenings. Meaning the amateur calibration Vivienne directed left a pattern that would reveal intent or reckless disregard more clearly than any one graph. The father pulled out the sensor logs. Together they examined the variation rates, small dips and spikes that aligned perfectly with the times the board had seen her adjusting the emitters. It wasn't just misuse, it was mishandling with predictable consequences. The son circled a section. Here. These 3 readings show she increased the angle each time your wife stepped outside. The father's stomach tightened. Not anger, not shock. Something heavier, the quiet, unwavering truth that this hadn't just been about control. Someone had weaponized inconvenience. Before he could speak, another knock sounded, softer this time. When he opened the door, the board member who had earlier confronted Vivienne stood there again, his expression grim. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said, "but there's something you need to know before tomorrow." Vivienne spent the last hour going door to door, trying to convince people that you tampered with the device yourself. The son let out a sharp breath. "She's desperate." The board member rubbed his forehead. "The problem is, some people believe her. Not everyone came to the meeting. Not everyone saw the evidence firsthand." The father kept his voice steady. "What will the board do?" "We're voting tomorrow morning. If the majority agrees, she'll be removed entirely. But she's trying to build enough doubt to sway the vote." Doubt. The oldest tactic. The weakest truth could crumble under it, but the strongest one didn't move at all. "We'll be there," the father said. The board member nodded gratefully and left. As the door closed, the son turned to him. "Then tonight we finish everything. No gaps, no weaknesses." The father looked at the graph-strewn table, the rows of evidence that formed a lattice of truth around their family. "Tonight," he agreed, "we make sure tomorrow ends what she started." And beneath the steady hum of the refrigerator, beneath the weight of fear and exhaustion, something else pulsed through the house. Momentum. Justice had begun to move. They worked late into the night, the kitchen table disappearing beneath layers of graphs, timestamps, crosswind signatures, and directional overlays. The father reviewed every entry with the same quiet patience he'd once used in the Air Force, while his son tightened the chain of evidence into something that couldn't be twisted by doubt. The house was still, the only movement the soft rise and fall of his wife's breathing from the living room, a reminder of why none of this could be allowed to slip. By the time the clock neared midnight, they had built a timeline so complete that even the smallest inconsistency had been removed. Every decision Vivienne made, every adjustment she directed, every harm the device caused had been mapped with precision. "This will hold," the son said, stacking the final set of printed graphs. "It has to," the father replied. "Tomorrow needs clarity." He stepped into the living room again, checking his wife. She stirred, blinking awake as he adjusted her blanket. When she saw him, her expression softened with that familiar blend of worry and trust. "Meetings tomorrow," she whispered. "Yes." "Be careful," she said, gripping his hand with what little strength she had. "Power like hers doesn't leave quietly." He nodded, though he didn't need the warning. He'd lived enough life to know that people who built their authority on intimidation often fought hardest when the truth stood inches from taking it all away. As dawn approached, he brewed coffee, preparing himself and his son for another long battle. The neighborhood outside felt tense, as if every house sensed what the day would decide. Cars drove slower, curtains shifted earlier. No one wanted to admit they were watching, but everyone was. The board meeting was scheduled for 9. At 8:30, a small cluster of neighbors formed near the walkway, hesitant at first, then gathering with more confidence. Some carried photographs of cracks in their homes. Others held January noise complaint forms they never submitted because they feared retaliation. All of them, knowingly or not, were stepping out of silence. When the father and son left the house, the neighbors parted slightly, making space. A few offered soft greetings. Others offered looks that said more than words could. Gratitude, fear, hope. At the community center, the atmosphere was electric. The board sat in 2 uneven rows up front, each member's expression a mixture of tension and expectation. Ortega was there too, standing off to the side, arms folded, posture firm. The father took that as a sign. They weren't alone in this anymore. Vivienne arrived last. She walked in with her usual poise, dressed in a pressed blazer and sharp expression. But something beneath her polished appearance had shifted. It was in the tightness behind her eyes, the subtle stiffness in her movements. She knew her power had stretched too far, and she was scrambling to hold the edges together. She took her place at the center of the room. "Let's begin," she announced, voice clipped. But the board chair raised a hand. "Before we proceed, we must address allegations regarding misuse of HOA authority and improper installation of an acoustic device." Vivienne forced a smile. "A misunderstanding. I've spoken with several residents, and many are concerned about false accusations circulating." The son stepped forward and placed their refined evidence packet on the table. "This contains the complete technical documentation," he said. "Every reading collected, every signature verified, every activation accounted for. Anyone who wishes to review it may do so." The chair slid it toward the center of the table. "We will." Vivienne tried to intercept. "With respect, technical equipment handled by unlicensed individuals." The father stepped forward, calm but unmistakably firm. "I installed aircraft vibration systems for years. My son served in acoustic warfare. We know what we're reading." Silence rippled through the room. Several neighbors murmured, recognizing for the first time that the quiet maintenance worker wasn't who they'd assumed. Vivienne's gaze flickered. "Even so," the chair held up a hand again. "Enough. Evidence will be reviewed. The community deserves transparency." Two board members opened the packet. Their faces shifted as they read the sequence of logs, from temperature differentials to amplitude spikes to crosswind deviations. The father watched closely. He saw comprehension settle in. He saw anger replace confusion. He saw the moment the truth became undeniable. One board member looked at Vivienne. "You approve this installation, personally?" Vivienne straightened. "Yes, but—" "And these directional adjustments?" another asked. "Were they also under your instruction?" "That's irrelevant." "No," Ortega said from the side of the room, voice steady. "It is very relevant." Vivienne turned sharply. "You are overstepping." "I'm enforcing municipal safety code," he replied. "This device violates multiple statutes." The board murmured again. A neighbor stood suddenly. "My son couldn't sleep for weeks." Another lifted her cracked planter. "This happened 3 days after you tested that device." Vivienne's composure thinned like paper held to flame. She snapped, "I acted in the community's best interest. Wildlife damage was increasing and no one else was taking responsibility." "Wildlife doesn't crack foundations," someone muttered. The chair exhaled. "We've seen enough. We need a formal vote." Vivienne's eyes darted between faces, searching for loyalty she no longer had. "Those in favor of removing Vivienne Crestwell as HOA president effective immediately," the chair said, raising his hand. One hand rose, then another. Then nearly every board member lifted theirs. Vivienne's breath caught. The chair lowered his hand. "Effective today, you are dismissed from all HOA duties pending investigation." The room released a collective sound. Not applause, not shock, but relief. Vivienne stepped back, face paling, realization settling like a stone. The father didn't smile. He didn't need to. Truth had done the work. Vivienne stood frozen, her dismissal echoing through the meeting hall long after the chair's words faded. The room had shifted around her, the board unified, the community awake, the evidence irrefutable. For the first time, her authority was no longer a shield. It was gone, stripped cleanly in front of every person she once controlled. The father watched quietly as she gathered her papers with trembling hands. She tried to mask it, but the strain showed. Her exit was swift, heels striking hard against the tile as she pushed through the crowd. No one followed, no one defended her. Even the neighbors who once feared her presence now stepped aside without hesitation. The father didn't linger on her retreat. His focus had already moved to what mattered next, the permanent fixing of the damage she caused, and the final phase of the victory strategy, poetic justice through competence and truth. The board reconvened after Vivienne left, huddling with Ortega and reviewing next, all steps. The chair turned toward the father and his son, their expressions no longer skeptical but respectful. "We owe your family a formal apology," he said. And the neighborhood owes you much more. That comes later, the father replied gently. Right now, we need to make sure the device is removed safely. We'll need someone certified, the chair said. This isn't something the HOA maintenance crew can handle. The son gestured to the logs. It's not just removal. The structural vibration damage requires assessment and repair. Some homes may be compromised in ways residents haven't noticed yet. A board member frowned. We'll have to put out a contractor bid. No, the chair corrected. HOA policy requires we choose the most qualified individual at the lowest rate before outsourcing to a firm. He looked at the father then, truly looked at him, seeing what he had overlooked for years. You're certified, aren't you? The father nodded once. My license is still active. A wave moved through the room. Surprise, recognition, relief. The maintenance man they barely acknowledged was the only person capable of repairing what their former president had broken. The son didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. The truth unfolding in the board's realization was enough. The chair straightened. Then the contract is yours if you want it. I'll take it, the father said. But not because of what she did to us. I'll do it because the neighborhood needs it. All of it documented. All of it done safely. Respect replaced tension instantly. People murmured their appreciation, some approaching to shake his hand, others thanking his son. The board scheduled the removal for the following morning, assigning oversight to Ortega to ensure transparency. After the meeting adjourned, neighbors approached in small groups. Some apologized for staying silent. Others admitted they sensed something wrong, but didn't understand how far it had escalated. The father listened with patience, offering calm reassurance rather than judgment. That quiet steadiness from him drew more gratitude than anger ever could. As they walked home, the community watched them with a new kind of attention. Not fear, not pity, but respect carved from truth. The son carried the evidence folder at his side, though he knew they likely wouldn't need it again. The data had served its purpose. Public exposure had already reshaped everything. Inside the house, the father went straight to his wife. She was awake, waiting, her eyes soft with concern. He sat beside her and held her hand, letting the silence speak first. How did it go? She whispered. His thumb brushed her knuckles gently. It's over for her. Relief washed through her slowly, visible in the way her shoulders relaxed and the tension around her eyes softened. So, it's safe now? It will be, he promised. They're removing the device tomorrow, and I'll be handling the repairs myself. She smiled faintly. Of course you will. He returned the smile, leaning forward to rest his forehead lightly against hers. He wasn't a boastful man, not one to claim credit or demand recognition, but today his dignity had been restored publicly, and for his wife, that mattered more than any punishment Vivienne would face. Later, after she settled back into sleep, the father and son prepared for the next day's work. They reviewed the safety protocols for dismantling the device, outlining the steps meticulously. The son made sure the calibration meter was functioning properly, while the father checked his certification documents for the board's records. The rhythmic quiet of their preparation marked a shift, the transition from defending their home to rebuilding the neighborhood. As midnight approached, the son paused. She won't come back quietly, he said. Maybe not, the father replied, but she doesn't have the power she once did, and truth doesn't lose once it's seen. They worked until the early hours, not out of urgency, but out of respect, for the community, for the evidence, for the woman resting in the next room who had suffered the most. The house held a different kind of silence now, not the tense, fragile quiet of fear, but the steady calm that comes after a storm breaks. Tomorrow would bring closure. Tonight brought peace. Morning settled over Crestmont Ridge with a gentler stillness than the days before, as if the neighborhood itself sensed a shift. The father woke early, stepping softly through the house to check on his wife. She was resting comfortably, her breathing smooth, a fragile kind of peace finally settling across her features now that the device had been shut down for good. He tucked the blanket around her once more, then prepared for the task ahead. Not confrontation, not defense, but restoration. His son joined him outside, toolbox in hand. The air carried the crispness of a morning, untainted by the piercing hum that had haunted their porch for weeks. A few neighbors were already gathered at a distance, watching quietly as the father approached the lamppost. They offered nods of acknowledgement, some hesitant, others openly grateful. Ortega arrived moments later, stepping from his SUV with an official clipboard and a look of resolute clarity. "Everything's ready," he said. "Board approved the full removal and your oversight of the repairs." The father gave a small nod. "Let's get started." The device, once a symbol of intimidation, looked strangely powerless in the daylight. Up close, the father could see the amateur wiring adjustments Vivienne had ordered. Misaligned brackets, poorly soldered joints, dangerously exposed conduits. Evidence of someone who believed authority was a substitute for expertise. He examined the mount first, ensuring every structural point was safe to handle. The son stood beside him, identifying each hazard with the same methodical precision he'd brought to the evidence logs. Together, they dismantled the emitter carefully, noting each step for the board's records. Neighbors edged closer as the device came apart piece by piece. Relief eased their posture with every component lowered to the ground. When the final bolt came free, the father stepped back, letting the weight of the moment settle. This wasn't just the removal of a harmful object. It was the removal of control, of fear, of a presence that had overshadowed their home for too long. One neighbor exhaled shakily. "It's really gone," another whispered. "Thank you. Both of you." The father didn't bask in the recognition. He simply nodded and began preparing for the second part of the task, assessing the structural harm left behind. With Ortega documenting each finding, he moved from home to home, measuring vibration patterns, identifying weakened points, reassuring residents with quiet certainty. His son assisted seamlessly, anticipating the next step before being asked. Together, they turned what had once caused harm into an opportunity for healing. By midday, a small but steady crowd followed at a respectful distance. They weren't watching out of curiosity. They were watching because, for the first time, they understood who stood among them. A man who had spent years in their community, unseen, underestimated, and yet willing to repair the very damage inflicted by those who dismissed him. As they reached the final home on the street, Ortega checked his notes. "This is enough to file a full negligence report," he said. "Vivienne will face investigation." The father simply replied, "Do what's right." He didn't wish her misery or public humiliation. He only wanted accountability and safety for the people who lived here. In the afternoon, he returned home, his wife waking just as he stepped inside. She gave him a small, tired smile. "I heard them talking out there," she whispered. "It sounds like it's done." "It is," he said softly, taking her hand in both of his. "The device is gone. The neighborhood's safe again." Her eyes glistened. "You did that." "We did it," he corrected, glancing at their son. "Together." She looked toward him, pride softening her expression. "You never stop protecting us." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. His love had always lived in action, not in declarations. The three of them shared a quiet moment. A family not restored to what they once were, but strengthened by what they had endured. Outside, the neighborhood returned to normal rhythms. Children played again. Dogs barked freely. Doors opened without hesitation. Later, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, the father stood on the porch and breathed in the evening air. No humming, no threat, just the peaceful settling of a place finally returning to itself. He wasn't a man who sought gratitude, but he felt the shift all around him. Neighbors stepping outside to wave, others pausing to say thank you, some offering dinners or help or simply acknowledgement. Respect didn't have to be loud to be real. The father stepped back inside, closing the door gently. The battle was finished, the truth had prevailed, and the home he fought for was safe again. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?